everyone. Well, as you know, I'm a philosopher, and so instead of playing with Legos or potatoes or eyeglasses, I get to play with ideas. The idea on the table today is this one, integrity. And what I'm thinking is that we all think it's a good thing. We think of integrity as a virtue. Right? But we should worry just a little bit about what it is that makes it a virtue. Okay, I'm going to hopefully do a little bit of Aristotle for me at the beginning. And the Aristotelian idea is that we have an ergon, we have a function, and human excellence consists in fulfilling that function. And that there are some qualities we'll call virtues that enable us to fulfill that function. So my question is, in what sense do we think of integrity as a virtue? And are there other possibilities on the horizon? Other ways we can think about the way we relate to others that are also valuable? So the first question, in what sense is integrity a virtue? Well, of course, knowing me, you know, I have to start with the root meaning of the word. And integrity comes from integer, which suggests a wholeness, an impermeability, and also from integration, which suggests making a whole out of parts. So in this sense, we can understand integrity in terms of constructing an inviolable whole out of the parts. In that sense, you could have ecosystems that have integrity. You could have fortifications that have integrity. You could have roadways named. So one set of views of what it is to think of integrity as a virtue is to think about it in terms of what Schiltz calls the integrated self picture. On this picture, we understand a person with integrity as a person that has the parts of their whole integrated in a certain way. The most basic of these integrated self pictures, the idea is that there's some sort of continuity between the desires that a person exhibits. That there's one controlling desire out of which all the other desires and actions come. And this gets at this notion of wholeness. There's some worry though. And one worry is this. On that construction, there's a lot of different things that count as desires. And there's no rules or no demand for reasons why you should order your life in terms of one set of desires over any other set of desires. So that I could be a person with integrity and order my entire life in pursuit of chocolate cake. It'd be convenient, but I certainly would enjoy it. Okay? But if I did that, oriented my entire life in terms of chocolate cake, oriented my entire life in terms of a pursuit of fame, or trying to avoid unpleasant sensations of some sort, you wouldn't want to say that that's an excellent human life. You wouldn't want to say that I have integrity. You wouldn't want to say that that's what integrity is, and that integrity is a virtue. Another sort of construction of integrity is this. Again, it's what Schiltz calls the identity picture of integrity. On this picture, integrity is a matter of having a character and being true to it. Having and acting on identity-conferring commitments. Here you could use someone like Bernard Williams' idea of ground projects. There are certain projects you have that you take as foundational to who you are. And then again, that your actions fall out of how you understand that ground project. Or worry. There's a worry though, again, there's been no constraints on what counts as a ground project. You could think family, you could think career, you could think social or political views, but there's no demand for rationality in the way you choose and engage with those projects. You could imagine someone who has integrity in that way, but still chooses and clings to projects merely because they're their own. And we might worry about that. A better worry is this, that if, again, there's no constraints on what counts as a project, that we could use any value or principle as your foundational project. And just to really drive the point home. Yeah. This is George Wallace, the governor of Alabama. He's a segregationist. He's famous for saying, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation tomorrow. Here he is, he's denying entry of African Americans into University of Alabama. He's trying to cease a project of integration. Now, here's someone who has a ground project. His ground project is promote segregation. And here he is acting in accord with those ground projects. We want to say this is a picture of integrity? I don't. And to make it even worse, let me say this. The interesting thing about George Wallace is apparently, I wasn't there, but apparently he renounced some of those views later. He renounced those views and said he was wrong. He thought he was doing the right thing when he was promoting segregation, and in retrospect, body will move, make him less a person of integrity? If integrity is a virtue, I think we don't want to be in a position of saying those sorts of things. But here's one. Some philosophers try out this idea, that we should think about integrity with the corollary of reasonableness. Lynn McFall says, when we grant integrity to a person, we need not approve of his or her principles or commitments, but we must at least recognize them as ones a reasonable person might take to be of great importance. So again, we're not going to put particular constraints on what count as projects which stand as grounding integrity, but they might be the kind of things a reasonable person would have that a person might be able to defend rationally. Again, I take that to be a friendly amendment to the picture. But one more friendly amendment from Cheshire Calhoun herself. She says, notice something about integrity. We don't think of people with integrity as being solitary. We think of people with integrity in community. Think about the opposite of a person with integrity. You might think of someone who's a hypocrite, who says one thing and does another. That's not a person off by themselves carrying out their commitments, but a person who's represented themselves to you in some way and then goes and does something else. This is what makes us grumpy. So what Cheshire Calhoun says is, look, it's not just about you as distinct from others. This is the kind of thing that happens in community. It's about standing for something. Her standing for something is not just something she does for herself. She takes a stand for and before all deliberators who share the goal of determining what it's worth doing. So in this picture, we have people who are committed to certain conceptions of the good life, engaging rationally with others, and listening to what they have to say, so they deliberate together. That's a nice picture of integrity. But those who know me are not at all surprised to say I've got a few questions about how this plays out across cultures. Are there other possibilities on the horizon? I think so. Thomas Kasoulas writes a book called Integrity or Intimacy. It's about cultural difference. And he starts with some experiences he himself had in Japan. He noticed a number of times when there was cross-cultural confusion. And what he found often was it was not necessarily a matter of being unable to understand the words coming out of another person's mouth, not even disagreement about empirical facts, but disagreement about what counted in a dispute as good reasons for or against a thesis. So he tells a story about a dispute that for whatever reason he was brought in to adjudicate. And it was a Japanese businessman and a young American family. And the daughter in the young American family had taken the businessman's watch, thrown it up against a wall. The businessman was displeased. And what he found is they didn't have a problem such that they couldn't understand each other. They didn't have a problem about what had happened. The problem that was at issue there was that the businessman wanted to focus on their bad parenting. They should have taught their child not to throw watches against walls. And the family wanted to focus on why exactly this man had given his expensive watch to a small child. Right? There were different things that mattered. And Kasoulas talks about that in terms of foreground and background. What is foreground in one culture may be background in another. It's not that the Japanese think differently from Westerners, but they think about different things, pick out different aspects of phenomena as most worthy of attention. Again, Kasoulas thinks that there is an intimacy orientation in Japan and an integrity orientation in the West. He says, think about these two opposed concepts like sand and salt in a beach. Integrity is like the sand. The sand is whole and viable. It doesn't change as a result of things outside it. Sand on that beach is going to be exactly the same as sand in the bottom of the ocean. The other side, though, the salt does change. He says this represents a kind of intimacy orientation. Intimacy, he means, of course, in the wider sense, in the sense of sharing things with people who are close to you. He says the salt will change in the water. It gives up its crystalline nature, the pure water gives up its purity, and out of that we get this seawater, which can support life. Notice wildly different ways of thinking about the self that underlie these two orientations. On the integrity orientation, once again, we get whole, discrete individuals, separate from each other. Any relationship between the two is one of, the way we think about it, is in terms of contracts,
rights, agreements between two discrete things. On the other side, in this intimacy orientation, we see not discrete individuals, but rather a picture of interdependence, so that it's almost funny to think about relationships between them since they're constantly in relation to each other. Casilla says, look, this way of thinking about the self and this way of valuing integrity over intimacy plays out in culture. So on an integrity orientation, you're going to see values in aesthetics like creativity as artistic autonomy. We're expressing ourselves through our artwork. In ethics, you're going to hear about preserving other people's rights. And we're going to think in terms of universal principles. In politics, we're going to talk about the state is composed of individuals bound by social contracts. We're going to hear about, again, rights and responsibilities. Whereas in a different orientation, you might think of things wildly differently. So you might think of aesthetics as creativity through naturalness, as spontaneously arriving from self and world. The thing you'll notice about this is actually a Chinese painting. What you notice at the top is those stamps and characters. Those were actually added later, not by the artists themselves, but by someone who thought this poem kind of adds to the way we understand this scene. It's a strange notion for us that one might continue adding to something perfectly normal in this orientation. In ethics, you'll hear about this discourse of compassion, or responsiveness to the other, as opposed to rights and responsibilities. In politics, we'll think about the individuals as part of the body of the state, as opposed to being related by relationships or contracts we'd entered into. I'm not arguing that we should give up integrity in favor of intimacy, not by a long shot, but I am arguing that we should take it seriously. And just a minute, take it seriously in part because we want to talk to people from across cultures, but also because there's some pretty stinking good philosophical reasons for taking this notion of the self very seriously. Buddhists, just one example, the Buddhists deny that we are, in fact, discrete individuals continuing unchanged throughout time. It's a notion that doesn't make much sense. They notice that we have it. They think it's a mistake. It's a mistake to misperceive ourselves as discrete individuals when we are rather just something that comes out of a collection of underlying conditions. And that this is the cause of many, many, many of our problems. We get connected to these desires, identify with them, are frustrated when they are frustrated. We relate to others in terms of jealousy and anger, instead of recognizing our continuity with them. Here's the line. In the absolute sense, there is no self here to be found. Mohanty says, comparative philosophy can serve philosophy well if it's harnessed for the purpose of freeing us from our own dogmatic inhibiting of our own tradition, and for bringing to our attention other possibilities on the horizon. I think the intimacy orientation is another possibility on the horizon. I'm not saying, again, that we should give up integrity, but I am saying a recognition of what connects us to others in a discourse and a discourse of sharing with others has value as well. Thank you. That's it.